July 3rd, 1941, near the Berezina River in the heart of what is now Belarus. Oberleutnant Hans von Schiller of the 18th Panzer Division peered through the vision slit of his Panzer III. His crew was flush with the arrogance of victory. In less than 2 weeks, Operation Barbarossa had shattered the Soviet frontier. They had swept through Poland and France, their panzers the unstoppable iron fist of the Blitzkrieg. The Soviet forces they had encountered so far only confirmed their contempt. Columns of burnt-out, pathetic-looking T-26 and BT tanks littered the roadsides. Thinly armored machines that popped open like tin cans under the fire of his 50mm cannon. His gunner, a young man named Klaus, pointed towards a new shape emerging from the tree line. It was unlike the others. It was low, sleek, and its hull and turret were angled back at sharp, almost unnatural degrees. It moved with a surprising speed, churning through the soft earth on wide, flat tracks. "Look at that thing, Lieutenant," Klaus muttered over the intercom, his voice laced with disdain. "The welding is a mess. It looks like it was put together in a barn." He was right. From a distance, they could see the crude, uneven seams on its armor. The paint was streaky, applied with no care for appearances. It lacked the sharp, clean lines and meticulous finish of a German machine. It was brutish, agricultural, an insult to the fine art of engineering. It was a peasant's tank. "Target identified. Range 800 meters. Engage," von Schiller ordered, a sense of routine in his voice. The Panzer III lurched as its gun fired. They watched the tracer-round speed towards the target, striking it squarely on the upper hull. And then the impossible happened. The shell didn't penetrate. It ricocheted, screaming off into the sky in a flash of sparks. "A deflection! Reload!" von Schiller yelled, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. Again, the 50mm gun barked. Again, the shell bounced off the angled armor as if it were a child's toy. The Soviet tank, seemingly unperturbed, continued its advance. It swung its long-barreled gun towards them. Von Schiller saw a flash, and before he could even process the sight, the world erupted. The Panzer III next to his was obliterated in a ball of fire and black smoke, its turret blown clean off its chassis. In that single, terrifying moment, on a forgotten battlefield in Belarus, the German illusion of technological supremacy was shattered. The crude, simple machine they had just scorned had rendered their weapons, their tactics, and their arrogance utterly obsolete. The laughter died. This was the Wehrmacht's first, shocking introduction to the T-34. It was a tank born not of engineering perfection, but of brutal pragmatism. And it would become the machine that would bleed the Panzerwaffe white, a symbol of Soviet resilience that would ultimately drive itself into the very heart of a ruined Berlin. This is the story of how a tank, scorned for its simplicity, became the Soviet Union's war-winning weapon. To understand the shock of the T-34, one must first understand the profound philosophical chasm that separated German and Soviet tank design in 1941. German engineering was a reflection of the nation's industrial culture, precise, complex, and obsessed with technical excellence. A Panzer IV was a masterpiece of intricate machinery. It featured a 3-man turret, a revolutionary concept that allowed the commander to focus solely on commanding, the gunner on gunning, and the loader on loading. This division of labor gave them a huge tactical advantage. Their optics, made by the legendary Zeiss company, were superb, allowing them to spot and engage targets at ranges their opponents could barely see. Every Panzer was equipped with a radio, turning them into a coordinated pack of wolves, a true Panzerwaffe. They were beautifully made, comfortable for the crew, and mechanically sophisticated. They were, in essence, the finely crafted instruments of a master swordsman. Soviet design philosophy was forged in a different crucible entirely. It was shaped by the brutal realities of Stalin's Russia, a vast, undeveloped nation with immense distances, no road network to speak of, and the climate of savage extremes. They needed a tank not for the parade grounds of Berlin, but for the bottomless mud of the Rasputitsa, and the soul-crushing cold of General Winter. They needed a machine that could be produced by the millions, crewed by hastily trained conscripts, and maintained with a hammer and a prayer in the middle of a frozen steppe. The Soviet approach wasn't about perfection, it was about sufficiency. It asked not what is the best we can possibly build, but what is good enough to win, and how can we build 10,000 of them. This philosophy found its ultimate expression in the work of one man, Mikhail Koshkin. Koshkin was the chief designer at the Kharkov locomotive factory, known as Factory Number 183. He was a brilliant, driven and stubborn engineer who envisioned a new type of universal tank that would combine the mobility of the BT series cavalry tanks with the armor of an infantry tank. He envisioned a machine that was simple, rugged and lethal. Koshkin's design, initially designated the A-32, was built around what historians now call the trinity of revolutionary innovations. Three features that, when combined in a single vehicle in 1941, made it the most advanced tank in the world. The first and most important was its armor. Koshkin and his team had embraced the concept of heavily sloped armor. The physics are simple but profound. A flat, vertical plate of armor presents its exact thickness to an incoming shell. But if you tilt that same plate backwards, the shell has to travel through a much greater effective thickness of steel to penetrate. Furthermore, an angled surface dramatically increases the chance that the shell will simply deflect or ricochet harmlessly away. The T-34's hull featured a 45mm thick frontal plate, but it was sloped at a steep 60-degree angle. This gave it the effective protection of over 90mm of vertical armor, far more than the 30mm or 50mm of flat armor on the German Panzer III and IV. Its turret was a complex casting of curved, angled steel. The result was a shell-shedding shape that baffled and terrified German anti-tank gunners. The second element of the Trinity was its engine. The T-34 was powered by the Model V2, a 12-cylinder, 39-litre aluminium block diesel engine producing 500 horsepower. In an era when nearly every other nation's tanks, including Germany's, ran on highly flammable gasoline, the use of diesel was a masterstroke. Diesel fuel is far less volatile, meaning the T-34 was much less likely to burst into flames when hit, a notorious and feared weakness of German Panzers. The V2 engine also provided excellent torque and a remarkable operational range of over 400 kilometers, a crucial advantage on the endless expanse of the Eastern Front. The third and final element was its mobility. The T-34 used a Christie suspension system, an American invention the Soviets had licensed in the 1930s. This system, with its large road wheels and long travel coil springs, allowed the T-34 to move at high speeds over rough terrain. This was paired with another simple but brilliant feature: wide 500mm tracks. These mud skis distributed the tank's 26-ton weight over a large surface area, giving it superb flotation. While German Panzers, with their narrow, complex tracks, would get hopelessly bogged down in Russian mud and snow, the T-34 would appear to float over it, appearing where the Germans thought no tank could possibly go. To prove his radical design, Koshkin undertook an extraordinary feat. In the brutal winter of 1940, he personally led a two-tank convoy on a grueling 2,000-kilometer drive from his factory in Kharkov, Ukraine, all the way to Moscow to demonstrate the A-32 to Stalin and the High Command, and then back again. The epic journey through snowdrifts and across frozen rivers proved the machine's incredible reliability, but it came at a terrible cost. Koshkin, driving in the freezing conditions, contracted pneumonia. He would die in September 1940, never living to see his creation change the course of history. He was the father of the T-34, and his dedication had cost him his life. When the Wehrmacht stormed across the Soviet border in June 1941, they were utterly unprepared for what Koshkin had unleashed. The initial reports from the front were so incredible that they were dismissed by the German High Command as battlefield exaggeration. Heinz Guderian, the father of the Blitzkrieg and Germany's foremost tank expert, was one of the first to understand the horrifying new reality. In his memoirs, Panzer Leader, he described a battle near Mtsensk in October 1941, where his vaunted Panzers ran headlong into a brigade of T-34s. He wrote, "With a sense of awe, the T-34 tank was a type that was unknown to us. This was the first occasion on which the vast superiority of the T-34 to our tanks became plainly apparent. The short 75mm gun of our Panzer IV was only effective against the T-34 at very short ranges. We suffered grievous losses." Guderian was so shaken that he immediately filed a detailed report to his army group, demanding that a special commission be sent to the front to study this new Soviet weapon. He advocated that Germany should abandon its own designs and simply copy the T-34 outright. General Paul Ludwig Ewald von Kleist, commander of the 1st Panzer Group, was even more blunt in his assessment, calling the T-34 the finest tank in the world. For the common German soldier, the Lanzer, the T-34 was a source of pure terror. Their standard anti-tank weapon, the 3.7cm Pak-36, was a fine gun against the tanks of 1939. Against the T-34, it was useless. The shells simply bounced off. The gun crews, with bitter gallows humor, nicknamed it the Heeresklopfgerät, the Army's door knocker. To face a T-34 with a Pak-36 was a suicide mission. The psychological effect was devastating. A new term entered the German military lexicon, Panzerschreck, or tank panic. German panzer crews felt a similar sense of helplessness. Their rounds would spark harmlessly against the T-34's sloped hide, while the T-34's powerful 76.2mm gun could slice through their vertical armor from over a kilometer away. The Germans had to resort to desperate and often suicidal tactics. The only weapon in their arsenal in 1941 that could reliably destroy a T-34 at range was the legendary 88mm flak gun. Originally designed as an anti-aircraft weapon, its high-velocity shell could punch through the T-34's armor. Wehrmacht commanders began using their 88s in a direct-fire anti-tank role, a battlefield improvisation born of sheer necessity. At close quarters, infantrymen would try to disable the tanks by swarming them, attempting to jam grenades into their tracks or attach magnetic mines to their hulls. These were the actions of an army that had been technologically checkmated. However, the T-34 of 1941 was far from a perfect weapon. While its core design was revolutionary, its execution was deeply flawed. The initial scorn of the German engineers wasn't entirely misplaced. It was just focused on the wrong things. The build quality was, by German standards, appalling. The armor plate was often brittle, and the welds were so crude that they could sometimes crack or spall on the inside when hit, sending deadly shards of metal flying through the crew compartment, even if the shell didn't penetrate. The transmission was notoriously unreliable, often called the gearbox of fear by Soviet crews, requiring a hammer to shift gears. The most critical flaw, however, was inside the turret. The T-34 had a cramped two-man turret. This forced the tank's commander to also act as the gunner. He was overwhelmed with tasks, trying to find targets, aiming and firing the main gun, commanding his driver, and attempting to coordinate with other tanks. This was in stark contrast to the German three-man turret, where a dedicated commander could maintain 360-degree situational awareness and direct the battle. Soviet commanders suffered from severe tunnel vision. To make matters worse, most T-34s in 1941 were not equipped with radios. They communicated using signal flags, a hopelessly archaic method that made coordinated, large-scale armored assaults nearly impossible. These weaknesses allowed the better-trained, tactically superior German Panzer crews to inflict massive losses on the Soviets, even with their inferior tanks. But every T-34 they destroyed seemed to be replaced by two more. The Germans were winning battles, but they were beginning to understand they were fighting a new kind of war of attrition against an enemy with seemingly limitless resources.
The true genius of the T-34 was not just in its design, but in its producibility. As the Wehrmacht advanced deeper into Russia in the autumn of 1941, they threatened the industrial heartlands of Ukraine, including Kharkov, the birthplace of the T-34. In response, Stalin ordered one of the most astonishing logistical feats in human history: the wholesale evacuation of Soviet industry. In a matter of months, over 1,500 factories, along with millions of workers and their families, were dismantled, loaded onto tens of thousands of railway cars, and transported over 1,000 miles east to the Ural Mountains, beyond the reach of German bombers. Factory number 183 was reassembled in the city of Nizhny Tagil in a new industrial complex that would become known as Tankograd, Tank City. The conditions were inhuman. Workers, many of them women and teenagers, reassembled the factories in the open, in the middle of the Siberian winter. They lived in crude wooden barracks or dugouts, working 12-hour shifts on starvation rations, driven by the slogan, "Everything for the front, everything for victory." Out of this suffering, an avalanche of steel began to pour eastwards. Production numbers that had been in the hundreds before the war swelled into the thousands, and then tens of thousands. The German response to the shock of the T-34 was characteristically thorough. They reverse-engineered captured T-34s and began a crash program to develop a new generation of tanks. This effort produced two of the most famous tanks of the war, the Panzer V Panther and the Panzer VI Tiger. The Panther in particular was a direct answer to the T-34, explicitly copying its sloped armor, long overhanging gun, and wide tracks. On paper, the Panther was a vastly superior tank. Its 75mm high-velocity gun was more powerful than the T-34's, and its frontal armor was thicker. But it was a German answer to a Soviet problem. It was fantastically complex, weighing nearly 45 tons, and plagued with mechanical problems, especially in its early models. It required 300,000 man-hours to produce one Panther. The Soviets, embracing simplicity, could build a T-34 in a fraction of that time. For every Panther that rolled off a German assembly line, the Soviets were producing 10 T-34s. The Germans had fallen into a trap. In trying to build a better T-34, they had created a machine that was too expensive, too complex, and too few in number to compete in the brutal arithmetic of the Eastern Front. Soviet quantity had a quality all its own. This clash of philosophies reached its fiery climax in July 1943. On the rolling plains around the city of Kursk, it was the largest tank battle in history. The Germans intended to use their new Panthers and Tigers to cut off a huge Soviet salient, hoping to destroy the Red Army and regain the strategic initiative. What they met was a defense in depth, miles deep, backed by thousands of T-34s. At battles like Prokhorovka, hundreds of tanks clashed at close range in a chaotic, swirling melee. The Germans, with their superior guns and optics, inflicted horrendous losses on the Soviets. But the Red Army could afford the losses. For every T-34 that brewed up, there was another one waiting to take its place. The Panzerwaffe, however, could not. Their elite crews were irreplaceable. Their complex Tigers and Panthers could not be easily repaired in the field. Kursk broke the back of the German armoured forces on the Eastern Front. They had lost the initiative forever, bled dry by the relentless tide of Soviet steel. The T-34, the simple tank, had won the most decisive battle of the war. Even as they were churning out T-34s by the thousands, Soviet designers were not idle. They listened to the feedback from the front lines and worked continuously to improve their war-winning design. The most significant evolution came in the winter of 1943 to 44, with the introduction of the T-34/85. This new model addressed the single greatest weakness of the original, the two-man turret. The T-34/85 featured a new, larger, three-man cast turret. This finally gave the tank a dedicated commander, freeing him to direct the battle while the gunner handled the gun. This single change exponentially increased the tank's tactical effectiveness. The new turret also housed a far more powerful weapon, the 85mm D5T gun, a weapon capable of penetrating the frontal armor of a Tiger or Panther at combat ranges. The T-34/85 was the perfection of an imperfect design. It retained all the original strengths, its mobility, reliability, and ease of production, while fixing its most critical flaws. It was now not only a war-winning weapon of mass production, but a genuinely excellent tank in its own right. It was the T-34/85 that formed the spearhead of the Red Army's final titanic offensives. During Operation Bagration in the summer of 1944, thousands of T-34s tore through the German Army Group center, inflicting the greatest defeat in German military history. They led the Vistula-Oder offensive, covering hundreds of miles in a matter of weeks. And in April 1945, it was the T-34/85, its hull scrawled with patriotic slogans and red stars, that clawed its way through the rubble-choked streets of Berlin, firing its 85mm gun point blank into the Reichstag. The crude peasant's tank had arrived at the gates of the master's palace. The story of the T-34 is the story of a war of ideas as much as a war of machines. The German engineers who first scorned its crude construction were not wrong about what they saw. They saw a machine that lacked refinement, that sacrificed crew comfort for simplicity, and that was built with brutalist efficiency rather than artisan pride. What they failed to see was that these were not weaknesses. They were the very source of the T-34's strength. They were judging the tank against their own philosophy of warfare, blind to the fact that the Soviets were fighting a different war altogether. Germany built tanks as if they were fighting a duel, crafting exquisite rapiers for a contest of skill. The Soviet Union built the T-34 as if they were fighting a war of survival, forging a million crude, effective clubs. In the end, the clubs won. The legacy of the T-34 is immense. It forced a complete revolution in German tank design and, arguably, set the template for the modern main battle tank, with its balance of firepower, mobility, and sloped armor. With over 84,000 units produced, it is the most produced tank in history, a testament to its simple, effective design. It went on to serve in dozens of armies around the world for decades after World War II, a rugged symbol of Soviet power and influence. In his post-war analysis, the German general Friedrich von Mellenthin, a veteran of countless battles against the T-34, wrote the most fitting epitaph: "We had nothing comparable." The T-34 was a formidable combination of mobility, armor protection, and firepower. The terror of the T-34's appearance in 1941 has not been forgotten by the German soldiers who had to face them. The German engineers' initial scorn was the hubris of a nation that believed its technological sophistication made it invincible. The T-34 was the brutal, simple, and undeniable proof that they were wrong. It was a victory of pragmatism over perfection, of mass over class, of sufficiency over sophistication. The laughter that echoed on that July day in 1941 was silenced by the roar of tens of thousands of diesel engines, a sound that grew louder and louder until it became the triumphant soundtrack of the Red Army's march to victory.